Alright guys, so as you probably noticed, in those couple of worked examples, we've only looked at how to solve polynomial equations with one type of x. Now what we need to do is go through and have a look at how to solve polynomial equations with more than one type of x. So let's check that out.
So in these worked examples, the question says solve the following. For part A, 2x to the power of 4 is equal to 50x squared, and B, x cubed minus 4x squared minus 7x plus 10 is equal to 0. So let's have a look at part A first, shall we? Now the very first step says rewrite the equation so that it equals to 0. Now as you can see, this equation does not equal to 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the one with the lowest power, that's the x squared here. We're going to move that over to the other side. So you're going to get 2x to the power of 4 minus 50x squared is equal to 0. Now the next step says how many types of x are there? Well, we've got an x to the power of 4 and an x squared. So because we've got more than one type, what we need to do is factorize the polynomial as much as possible. Now in order to factorize, we need to always look for the highest common factor first. Now the highest common factor between 2x to the power of 4 and negative 50x squared is going to be 2, because 2 goes into both, and x squared, because x squared also goes into both. That's going to leave us with x squared inside the brackets, because 2x squared times x squared is 2x to the power of 4, and 2x squared multiplied by negative 25 will get us negative 50x squared, and that's going to be equal to 0. Now what we need to do is look to factorize the bracket in here, because we've only got one type of x outside, so that's all good. So yeah, like I said, the next step is to look at how to factorize the bracket in here. Now we've got a quadratic expression here, so what we need to do is look to factorize like you would any normal quadratic with two terms, because as you can see there's only two terms here. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is write it as 2x squared bracket. Now quadratic with two terms, what we need to do is write brackets squared minus brackets squared is equal to 0. And what we need to do is figure out what will go in the brackets. Now what squared will get us x squared? Well, that's going to be x. And what squared will get us 25? Well, that's going to be 5. So as you can see here, what I can do is go through and factorize this now. So that's going to get me 2x squared bracket x plus 5 x minus 5, because that's how you factorize a quadratic with two terms. And that's going to be equal to 0. So now what I need to do is let each factor equal to 0 and solve for x in each case. So because I've only got one type of x in each one of the brackets, I can do that. So I'm going to make 2x squared equal to 0. I'm going to make x plus 5 equal to 0. And I'm going to make x minus 5 equal to 0. Going through and doing that now, dividing 0 by 2, well that's going to get us x squared is equal to 0 still, and square rooting 0, well that's just going to get us x is equal to 0. X plus 5 is equal to 0, so I'm going to minus 5 off both sides, so that's going to get us x is equal to negative 5, and adding 5 to both sides for this one, you're going to get x is equal to 5. Therefore, x is equal to 0, x is equal to negative 5, and x is equal to 5. That means if I substitute in 0, negative 5 or 5 into this equation here, you'll end up getting the same answer. Alright, part B says x cubed minus 4x squared minus 7x plus 10 is equal to 0. So the very first thing I need to do is make sure that my equation equals to 0. Well, it does, so step 1's done. Now step 2 says how many types of x are there. So we've got an x cubed, an x squared, and x. So therefore we've got more than one type of x, so we must factorize. So let's go through and do that. Now in order to factorize, what I need to do is look for factors of this. And in order to do that, I'm going to apply the factor theorem. So I'm going to look for factors of 10 and try and just substitute that in for trial and error. So let's just say p of 2 for example. So p of 2, and that's going to be equal to 2 cubed minus 4 times 2 squared minus 7 times 2 plus 10. 2 cubed is 8, 2 squared is 4 times negative 4 is negative 16, minus 7 times 2 is 14, plus 10, and that's going to get us 8 minus 16 is negative 8, minus 14 is equal to negative 22, plus 10 is equal to negative 12, so therefore x minus 2 is not a factor. Right, so I know x minus 2 is not a factor, so I'm just going to get rid of that now and try again. And I want to see if x plus 1 is a factor, so is x plus 1 a factor? So I'm going to substitute in p of negative 1, and that's going to get me negative 1 cubed minus 4 times negative 1 squared minus 7 times negative 1 plus 10. And that's going to be negative 1 cubed is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1 times negative 4 is negative 4. Negative 7 times negative 1 is plus 7 and plus 10. Negative 1 minus 4 is negative 5, plus 7 is 2, plus 10 is 12. Okay, so that therefore is equal to 12, and because it's not equal to 0, we know that x plus 1 is not a factor. So I'm going to rub this out again and have another go at another one. And I'm going to check to see if x minus 1 is a factor. So is x minus 1 a factor? What I need to do is substitute in p of 1 then, so I'm going to go p of 1 is equal to 1 cubed minus 4 times 1 squared minus 7 times 1 plus 10. I then go through and simplify, so 1 cubed is 1, 1 squared is 1 times negative 4 is negative 4, negative 7 times 1 is negative 7 plus 10. 1 minus 4 is negative 3, minus 7 is negative 10, plus 10 is equal to 0. Woohoo! X minus 1 is a factor. Big smiley face after it's taken us a few times to get it. So now what I can do is I can just go through and factorize using p of 1. So I know that if x minus 1 is a factor, what I'm going to do is write 1 here. I'm going to write out my box. I'm going to write a nice little plus here. And I'm going to write all the coefficients of my p of x. So that is 1, negative 4, negative 7, and 10. And I'm going to write my 0 down the bottom here like so. And I'm going to write a little times out the bottom here. So very first step, 1 plus 0 is 1. 1 times 1 is 1. Negative 4 plus 1 is negative 3. 1 times negative 3 is negative 3. Negative 7 plus negative 3 is negative 10. 1 times negative 10 is negative 10. And negative 10 plus negative 10 is equal to 0. What I can now go through and do is write out my x's and my x squared. So I've got this here is my remainder, so that's all good because that's what we want because it's a factor. This here is my constant, this here is my x, and this here is my x squared. So therefore, p of x is equal to x minus 1, because we know that's a factor, multiplied by x squared minus 3x minus 10. So now what I need to go through and do is factorize this quadratic bracket. Now I've got 3 terms with no value for a out the front of the x squared. So what I'm going to do is look for the factors of negative 10. So I've got x and x like so. Factors of negative 10 are 1 and negative 10, 2 and negative 5, 5 and negative 2, and 10 and negative 1. Now which one's going to add to negative 3? Well, it's going to be 2 and negative 5 here. So that therefore is going to give us p of x is equal to x minus 1 out the front still, that's been brought from down up here. And then I'm going to get x plus 2 and x minus 5. Now what I need to do is just bring it up here and I need to solve it. Now in step 3 it says let each factor equal to 0 and solve for x in each case. So I've got the original equation up here that says x cubed minus 4x squared minus 7x plus 10 is equal to 0. Now we know that this factorized is the same as saying x minus 1, x plus 2, x minus 5 is equal to 0. So now what I can do is make each factor equal to 0. So I've got x minus 1 equals 0, x plus 2 equals to 0, and x minus 5 is equal to 0. Go through and rearrange and solve for x. So you've got x is equal to 1, x is equal to negative 2, and x is equal to 5. Therefore, if I substitute in x equals 1, x equals negative 2, or x equals 5 into this equation that you can see here that we've originally been given, what you'll end up getting is an answer of 0. Alright, so it's now time to press pause and attempt the following questions. That is, x cubed plus 6x squared equals 7x, and for part B, 2x cubed plus 4x squared minus 2x minus 4 is equal to 0. Remember when you're done to press play so you can check your answers out against mine. Right, so welcome back, and as I said, the first question says x cubed plus 6x squared equals 7x. So looking at this one now, what we're going to do is we're going to follow step 1, which is rewrite the equation so that it equals 0. So what I've done is subtracted 7x off both sides. That'll cancel this out here, making it equal to 0, so you get x cubed plus 6x squared minus 7x is equal to 0. Now I'm looking for common factors like I would always when factorising, and the common factor here would be x, because x goes into x cubed, x squared and x, so I've taken out as a common factor here, leaving me with x squared plus 6x minus 7 in brackets. Now what I want to do is factorise these brackets here, so it's a quadratic expression with 3 terms, and there's no value for a out the front. So what I want to do is look for factors of negative 7 that add to 6. So the factors of negative 7 are 1 and negative 7, and 7 and negative 1. Now which ones add to 6? Well, it's going to be 7 minus 1 adds to 6. So you're going to get x from here, comes down here, multiplied by x plus 7, x minus 1, because this bracket here is x plus 7, x minus 1. And that there is equal to 0. Now what we have to do is we have to make each factor equal to 0. So the x is going to be equal to 0, the x plus 7 is going to be equal to 0, and the x minus 1 is equal to 0. Therefore, we've got x is equal to 0. When I subtract 7 off both sides, you're going to get x is equal to negative 7. And when I add 1 to both sides, you're going to get x is equal to 1. Therefore, if I substitute in x equals 0, x equals negative 7, or x equals 1 into the original equation up here, we'll get left hand side is equal to right hand side. Part B, now this is a little bit more in depth, so we've got 2x cubed plus 4x squared minus 2x minus 4 is equal to 0. First step is to rewrite the equation so that it equals 0. Well, we've already done that, so we don't need to worry about it. The next step is to determine how many types of x there are. Well, we've got an x cubed, an x squared, and an x. So there's more than one type of x. That means we must factorise. Now in order to do this, what I need to do is look for factors of negative 4 and look to apply the factor theorem. So I've looked at the factors of negative 4 and I'm wondering, is x plus 2 a factor? I've also defined p of x as being this here. Just makes it a little bit easier. So is x plus 2 a factor? Well, let's have a look. In order to find that out, what I need to use is p of negative 2, because it says plus here, so we're going to write p of negative 2. And that therefore is going to give us 2 bracket negative 2 cubed, because wherever I see an x I write a negative 2, plus 4 bracket negative 2 squared, minus 2 times negative 2 minus 4. Negative 2 cubed is negative 8, negative 2 squared is 4, and negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. 2 times negative 8 is negative 16, 4 times 4 is 16, plus 4 minus 4 at the end. Of course, the 16 and the negative 16 here will cancel out, the 4 and the negative 4 will cancel out, leaving us with 0. Therefore, x plus 2 is a factor. Yes! Alright, next thing I need to do is I need to go through and factorise using the synthetic division, or divide using the synthetic division, should I say. So therefore I've got p of x is equal to 2x cubed plus 4x squared minus 2x minus 4. But before I go through and do anything like that, what I need to do is look to see if there's any common factors when factorising. Now if you have a look here, I've got a common factor of 2 because 2 goes into 2x cubed, also goes into 4x squared, negative 2x and negative 4. So I've taken 2 as a common factor. Now what I can go through and do is look to factorise this or divide this using the synthetic division. So what I want to do is I want to apply what I found out before, so x plus 2 is a factor, so I'm going to write negative 2 out the front here of my box, and I'm going to write out the coefficient. So the coefficient of x cubed is 1, the coefficient of x squared is 2, the coefficient of x is negative 1, and the constant is negative 2. What I need to go through and do now is simply do my multiplication and adding, that is dividing using the synthetic method. So I've got 1 plus 0 is 1, negative 2 times 1 is negative 2, 2 plus negative 2 is 0, negative 2 times 0 is 0, negative 1 plus 0 is negative 1, negative 2 times negative 1 is positive 2, negative 2 plus 2 is 0. Which is great, because that's what we want our remainder to be. So if that's our remainder, this here is our constant, this here is our x, and this here is our x squared. Now going down and writing this out as p of x, what I'm going to get is p of x is equal to, I've got my 2 out the front, I also know that x plus 2 is a factor, and when I divide this here by x plus 2, I'm going to get 1x squared, or x squared, plus 0x, well I don't need to write it, minus 1. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and write it like that. Now I've got p of x is equal to 2 bracket x plus 2, which is what I can see down the bottom there. And I've got to factorise this x squared minus 1 bracket, that is the quadratic bracket. So what I want to do is I've got to look at this as being 2 terms, because it's a quadratic expression with two terms, and when I factorize a quadratic expression with two terms, I need to write it as bracket squared minus bracket squared. Now what's going to go in the brackets in order to get us x squared? Well, it's going to be x. And what's going to go in the brackets to get us 1? Well, it's going to be 1. Because x squared is going to be equal to x squared, and 1 squared is going to be 1. Therefore, this bracket here, when factorized, is going to get us x plus 1 and x minus 1. So what I've gone through and done now is made each factor equal to 0. Now you don't need to worry about the 2, we're only looking for x's, so we don't worry about that. And we write x plus 2 is equal to 0, x plus 1 is equal to 0, and x minus 1 is equal to 0. When I rearrange to solve for x, I get x is equal to negative 2, x is equal to negative 1, and x is equal to 1. Therefore, if I substitute in negative 2...
Sweet, so I guess it's just like solving quadratic equations. That is, if you've got one type of x, you're going to use inverse operations to solve. And if you've got more than one type of x, you're going to need to factorize and make each factor equal to 0 in order to be able to solve. Alright guys, so that means it's the very end of this lesson. Now make sure you stay tuned for the very next lesson, because you're going to look at how to sketch the graph of cubic functions in their power form. So of course, like always, make sure you say hi to your maths teacher for me. Morsey out.